Okay. Well, so thank you everybody who is on the call today. As I mentioned, we will be recording this session, so it'll be made available soon after the presentation for anyone who wasn't able to attend. I want to start by just giving a little bit of an introduction for Dr. Griffin. Dr. Karen Griffin, PhD, is a research scientist in the field of shelter dogs and dog rehoming. She earned her doctorate in animal sciences at the University of Lincoln in Lincolnshire, England. The scope of her research interest and experience within this field includes how a dog fits into a home environment, what qualifies a successful dog placement, and how to improve the likelihood that a placement will be successful. Her research is based in both the US and in Europe, and she is focused on the practical and real-world applications of its findings. With a background in social sciences, Dr. Griffin employs an interdisciplinary approach to her research. She's also the founder and executive director of the Dog Rehoming Project, which is a nonprofit organization with the mission of bridging the gap between research and the people who need it to put science behind dog sheltering and dog rehoming. Karen, if you want to take it from here.
Yeah, thank you for the very kind introduction. Biographies always sound so long, like when someone reads them out. But anyway, I'm Karen. Thank you for inviting me. This has been a thing we've been working on for a while, so I hope it lives up to what we're hoping it to be. I think I've gotten rid of typos and issues. I was finishing this very late last night, and as I said to Kara earlier, sometimes things look great in the wee hours of the morning, but don't in daylight. So, but I think we're okay. Anyway, so we are first going to kind of go through the science, talking about why these topics are relevant, why they're important, what the scientific research says about them, and then what that means practically, which is very much what I do in all of my research. So let me do this. Okay. Okay. So today we are talking about getting animals not only into homes, and we're talking about dogs because that's my specific area of research. However, this is very applicable to all animals, so cats, small furries, etc. But I'm talking specifically in the scope of dogs. So, how to get dogs into homes and how to keep them there, and also how to make sure that in all regards the placement is successful. So, um, hang on. Okay. So why is this so important? There's a big gap of research in this field. So we have to take what we do have and kind of piece it together. So based on scientific evidence that does exist in nearly all situations, a dog's welfare and quality of life will be improved by living in a home. Therefore, it is logical that organizations strive to get dogs into homes as quickly as possible. And I should say specifically, in terms of the first point, we're comparing dogs living in a home compared to dogs living in a shelter environment. So we're talking about kind of things in a Western context. My work is very international, so we're not talking about kind of other populations of dogs, free roaming, community owned. We're talking about kind of our dog model. Okay, so I'm sure this is probably very obvious to all of you who do work in this field, but I thought it was necessary to kind of go over it. So why should we try to minimize dog stay in shelters? So, from a dog health and welfare perspective, and this is not an exhaustive list, these are just kind of some highlights. Shelters are loud. The decibel of sound in them can cause poor rest and sleep. So the quality of dogs being able to kind of get sound rest and sound sleep is an issue. And of course, if dogs aren't sleeping well, that can kind of, like humans, boil over into all sorts of other issues. Shelters are generally stressful environments. Research has looked at, various studies have looked at cortisol, which is a stress hormone, how its trajectory over the course of a dog's stay in a shelter. So definitely there are some increased cortisol levels when dogs come into a shelter. Increased likelihood of disease spread. So in a shelter environment that is overcrowded, possibly not as clean as it should be, um, despite our best intentions, there's an increased likelihood of disease spread. So that's detrimental, of course, to the dog population themselves, but also not lots of, some um, illnesses amongst dogs are also zoonotic, so we can get them. So things like parasites and whatnot. I should say, taking a quick step back, I know that everyone viewing here isn't necessarily part of a shelter, quote unquote. I'm using the term as a bit of an umbrella. So I fully recognize there are all sorts of different organizations, from big municipal shelters to, small little rescue organizations that maybe only adopt out a few dogs per month. And I know that also not all of the dogs that are part of these organizations necessarily stay in a shelter environment. Some are in foster homes or other situations. So while the kind of living in a shelter scenario doesn't necessarily apply to dogs in other environments pre-adoption, we don't know a lot about those other environments, so we kind of have to roll this all together. I hope that makes sense. Anyway, I just wanted to say that I recognize that organizations are very different, but we're using kind of shelter as an umbrella term. Okay, so that's from the dog's welfare perspective. As I'm sure you all know, shelters have a lot of challenges. So some of the reasons we need to get dogs into homes quickly from that perspective is having more dogs in an organization causes an extra strain on very limited resources. It can cause waiting lists of dogs to be admitted to the organization. This I know isn't as true with select intake organizations. I'm sorry, with open intake organizations, but with select intake ones, there might be a list of animals that people want to surrender, but they literally just don't have the space to take them in. And it can cause overcrowded shelters. And again, probably more true with open access or open admittance ones. Okay, so we know we need to get dogs into homes. However, that's only half the battle. So we need to get them into a home and we need to try our best to make sure that they stay in a home and do not go through a cycle of rehoming. So that's kind of the other half. So we want them to get in a home and we want that to be successful. And for some dogs in particular, we know that this can be especially challenging. So, okay. So that's kind of one piece. The other thing is, yes, it's important to get a dog into a home, but we want to make sure that their quality of life and their welfare is as good as possible in that new home. So it's great if they go into a new home, but if that family, that household isn't able to meet that dog's needs, there can be kind of some cancellation between the pros and cons of getting into a home and staying in a shelter versus staying in a shelter. So not only is it important that dogs remain in new homes, but it's equally as crucial that they do have a good quality of life there. So in order to increase the likelihood that both of these things are done, there are three important things based on the scientific evidence that we can do. So number one, providing pre-adoption education to adopters. Number two, working with adopters to ensure they have accurate and realistic expectations of adding a dog to their household. And number three, providing post-adoption support to adopters. Okay, so we're going to talk about the first thing, providing pre-adoption education to adopters. And I'm sure that a lot of your organizations do already do a lot of this, which is awesome. But we're going to kind of go through the nuts and bolts of it. Okay, so why is this important? So adopters may struggle to accurately recognize dogs' mirrored needs at a species, breed, and individual level. Additionally, adopters may not sufficiently be aware of the needs and therefore they're not doing the best job of being able to meet them. So if an adopter doesn't know if a need exists, how can they meet it? Also, adults and children may not be able to accurately interpret dogs' body language, causing them to misunderstand dogs' underlying emotional states. I do a lot of work around appropriate and safe adult-child relationships because we know that children in the home do have risk factors associated with them. So this is kind of one of the big areas where we really need to focus on all of these three things. And I should also say, I know that for some organizations, they will not allow dogs to go into a home with young children. That has also been found from scientific research. namely some of my own. But we're not suggesting that dogs shouldn't be rehomed into those households, but rather they're the kind of households that really need to be flagged for needing these extra supports and resources. So lastly, a study reported that a deficit in owner knowledge about dog needs and behavior may contribute to unrealistic expectations. Okay. 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 So, how can potential adopter screenings be helpful for education? I realize that organizations use all kinds of screening methods to sort of vet potential adopters. I know a lot are shifting away from sort of very strict questionnaires and interviews to more conversation-based approach. But nonetheless, the purpose of any type of these screening procedures is to gather information about the adopter. The question is what types of information are really important and what can we kind of learn from those? So we can use these to gather these for information gathering to determine which areas they specifically need education on. So if they have young children in the home, then education should really focus on how to create appropriate and safe child-dog relationships that will mitigate both relinquishment risk and a human safety risk. So that's just one example. All kinds of other things, if they have a very chaotic home and they have lots of sort of people coming and going, you might want to talk about how to, kind of organize your house and prepare people and your dog for coming in and going to the house, coming and going from the house. If people are, away from the house and at work for long stretches of time, let's talk about how can we kind of find things that would be able to support your dog and meet their needs while they're away from home. So whether that's dog walkers, maybe going to daycare occasionally. So really kind of seeing what their lifestyle is like, what their household is like, and where do we think that they really need that extra education. So some kind of general topics, and again, this is based on scientific research, that should be addressed in education. Again, if you kind of do an assessment and you're like, there's nothing like really remarkable that stands out about this household, and I don't mean remarkable, not remarkable in a negative way, I just mean that, they just seem like they're going to be a solid household. They don't have kids in the home. They have a pretty quiet house. They're not gone for long stretches, et cetera, et cetera. Then these are kind of the umbrella of things to cover. So how to help them understand dogs' needs at a breed and more critically an individual level. I harp on this a lot. My current primary research looks at dogs' needs, so I go over and over this. Next, the importance of preparing adopters' environments for bringing a dog home, such as putting up baby gates. And we really focus on erring on the side of caution. And we're going to talk about why that is in a moment. But basically, assuming that kind of, I don't want to say the worst case scenario, because again, that sounds really negative, but just erring on the side of, putting up baby gates, giving dogs space, etc. So the third thing is understanding dogs' body language. We know, for example, with kids and also true to adults, they may do a decent job of being able to recognize kind of the big body language, types of body language, growling, lunging, barking, that sort of thing. But we know that people struggle with the more nuanced things. So, and then more nuanced things often are correlated with stress. So things like lip licking or paw lifting, we're not so good at recognizing those. And the importance of advocating for their dog. I always remind myself and other people that part of your role of having a dog is advocating for their needs. So if you know that your dog doesn't really like having people approach them when they're out for a walk, and someone comes running up to you, it's okay to say, hey, my dog needs some space. I have literally put my hands up and to like very clearly show that you need to not approach. So advocate for your dog's needs, not what other people want to do, I think is appropriate. Okay. So a few misunderstandings to address, and I think these are really big ones. A dog liking something versus tolerating it are two entirely different things. I really wanted to show a video that a friend of mine posted on Facebook the other day, with her young niece, I don't know how old she was, maybe 5 or so, laying on top of their dog, who was this kind of black lab. And my friend thought that it was a very cute interaction. Look at them snuggling. They clearly like it. This dog was extremely stressed. I didn't think it was appropriate to steal the video from her for more sort of nefarious purposes, but so I didn't do it. But the dog was very, very, very stressed. And that dog was tolerating that interaction. That dog was not liking it. And if the dog stopped tolerating it, the child's head was very close to his face. And that potentially has the risk for some serious damage. So liking versus tolerating, dogs put up with a lot from us. We're going to get a little bit more to that in a moment, but it's really important to differentiate those two things. So I'm not going to get into great detail in this because I could spend like hours talking about this. But anthropomorphizing, if you don't know what that is, it's basically projecting our own as humans, feelings, emotional states, motivations, etc., onto non-human things. So in this case, we're talking about dogs. So dogs, like humans, are sentient beings. They have a lot of the same emotional states. Not all. They have a lot of the same feelings, not all. But we can't assume that we're one and the same. We're two separate species. So what a dog might like, or what we might like as a human, a dog might not like. So I use hugging as a really good example. This is a big thing, especially with young kids. Dogs tolerate hugging. They don't like it as a general rule. But in the case of young kids, they want to show their love. They want to show their affection for their dog. So as kids, they think, okay, I like to be hugged when I want to show love. My dog must like it too. However, anthropomorphization can also be helpful if it's done correctly, if we do it critically, but it can also be negative. So again, I'm not going to go into that, but that is kind of a double-edged sword. Okay, so management. So if a family comes in, and I know that everyone has different policies in terms of how their adoptions work. I'm sure some organizations, person comes in, they meet the dog, they go through the screening process, they can leave with the same day with the dog. I know other organizations have a longer process. Whatever that process is, really encourage people to go home and get their house set up, so that they are prepared. Again, so important with kids, but there are other things in the house and in the household that are important too. So when we think about preparing their home and environment, we're talking a lot about environmental management. So I know that this top point has the word home in it 3 times, but that's on purpose. So encourage adopters to get their home set up before bringing their dog home. So a few kind of guidelines or thoughts on environmental management. Use things like space or room dividers, such as baby gates, X pens. I know we all live in very different homes, very different sizes of homes, layouts, etc. So having space that can be flexible, that we can move around as our needs change, as we get to know our dog. So again, that goes back to kind of like erring on the side of caution. Like, hey, we're going to put up a lot of baby gates and a lot of X pens. And then as we get to know our dog better, as everyone settles in, then we can kind of move space around. Things like placing food and water bowls and beds in low traffic, quiet areas. As I'm sure we can probably imagine as humans, and this is where anthropomorphization is constructive, like we don't want to sleep where in like the middle of like a busy hallway, where people are coming and going and there's just lots of chaos. We want to sleep in like a comfy corner of the house, where no one is going to bother us. Same things with food. Make sure the dog has their own space. Again, I know this is hard if you have a really small space, but really think about if you can cordon off, a part of a room, a part of a bedroom, what have you. So the dog just has their own space. It's important for any household, but again, especially a household with kids, so that kids know like this is their dog space. Like we don't go in there, we don't bother it. This is their space. And so these are important things to talk about when you're working on education is like, hey, what does your house look like? To kind of get them to like think through these things. What does your house look like? What does your routine look like? What kind of modifications can you make? And then last thing is, again, this goes to understanding a dog's individual needs. If you have an older dog, a larger dog, what are some changes that you might need to make to best meet their needs? So on the left is one of my late dogs, who was an older guy. He had slippy back legs. Hard floors are really hard for dogs as they get older because they can't get traction. So I got him a raised bowl and a little mat to make it easier so he could stand and get his food and water. And then of course the photo on the right is a family who just bought a new baby home, so getting everyone set up for their own separate space. Okay, resources. It is awesome to educate adopters, but if you're not giving them the right information, you could be doing a huge like disservice. So using accurate and scientifically sound resources, imperative. There's a lot of readily available misinformation, namely on the internet, but also just kind of spread among people. So it's really important that the quality of the information that you give out is sufficient. So kind of guidelines, if you're handing out infographics, they should cite their sources. This is an infographic from our organization. It's very tiny, but down here are the references. And if they're not on the infographic itself, look on the website. You will have to do a bit of digging, probably, or maybe. If you're unsure about where to find appropriate resources, ask, don't assume. Don't just do a random, search on YouTube. Know who to ask. I'm going to send some links to pass on of kind of some good places to look for sufficient resources. But the part, kind of where we are in the world is everyone thinks they're an expert because they've watched 2 YouTube videos. Everyone is not an expert. So we want to make sure that the information we're giving out is appropriate. Okay, so that's it for education. The next piece, expectations. And this very much is wrapped together with education. So how can we work with adopters to ensure that they have accurate and realistic expectations of adding a dog to their household? Okay, why are realistic expectations so important to have? This is from my own house several years ago. And I'm going to show you the fallout picture. My large dog, who I always forget can reach the back of the kitchen counters, found a completely full bag of flour and decided that flour was delicious while I was out of the house for, I don't even know, an hour. And I don't know if you remember from kindergarten, but flour and water create paste. So that is what he decided to do. Inevitably, things will not go to plan. So the picture on the right is the kitchen going into the other room. It was a disaster. Similarly, on the left, and this is the dog that caused all of this, he all of a sudden needed to have knee surgery, very major and very expensive knee surgery. I was not planning on him needing major knee surgery. So these things happen. Things will not go to plan. Okay, so that's the one thing. Things won't go to plan. This I touched on a little bit ago in the very beginning. We ask a lot of our dogs to fit in. They tolerate a lot from us because we're asking our dogs to fit into our human environments. So the demands we place on them, and I don't mean kind of doing a whole bunch of like tricks and commands. I just mean literally existing in our space with us. They can vary in nature, but nonetheless, we ask a lot of them. And some dogs might struggle to fit in, and they might struggle to cope and live with us in our environment. So we need to be mindful of this, what we are asking our dog to do. So things like, you must not jump on people that come into the house. You must not bark a lot. Those sorts of things. You must not dig up the backyard. A lot of these behaviors are very natural, and it's totally fine from a welfare perspective that they're doing it. But hey, barking is annoying to the neighbors. Digging up the backyard is a problem for, the garden you've just planted. So we ask a lot from them. Okay, what does the science say about expectations? The science around expectations is very strong. So, research has found that a mismatch in owner expectations significantly increases the likelihood that a dog will be relinquished. Okay, so just a kind of overview of some of the research. One study found that if the amount of work caring for a dog was more than expected, dogs were nearly 6 times more likely to be relinquished. The same study noted that a greater proportion of owners who had obtained their dog from a shelter reported that their dog had been more work than expected to owners who obtained their dog from other means. We don't know exactly why, but it was just kind of a side note in the study. Another study found that it increased the odds of relinquishment by nearly 10 times, this mismatch in expectations. And another found that a third of surrendering owners said their dog was more work than they expected. And finally, a study found that poor preparations and inappropriate expectations was one of the most common classes of reasons for relinquishment cited by surrendering owners. So, you go, you get a dog, it's really exciting. You're going to bring this dog home, your kids are going to be excited about it. You have all these grand plans. But we all know that I think that in reality, what actually happens can be quite different from those expectations. So, really trying to get adopters to be aware that things are not going to go to plan. This idea that you have in your head, some of it might be accurate, but a lot of it might not be. And it takes time for everyone to readjust. It is a huge change bringing a dog into your household, even if you already have dogs, even if you've had dogs your entire life. I mean, I personally generally plan on the first night I bring a dog home into my own house, just not sleeping. So it's important to have these things in mind. Okay, so kind of some important bullet points to cover in terms of expectations. Adding a dog to the household is a huge adjustment for everybody. So as much as you might think that it's going to be seamless, it's probably not going to be. Things are going to arise. So be patient with yourselves, but be patient with your dog. Like this is a big change. And even though we know that dogs will probably do better in a home than a shelter, like this is a lot. They're going to an entirely different environment that they have to figure out. Dogs are a lot of work. So their care can take considerable amounts of time on a daily basis, necessitating changes in adopters' routines and schedules. So, when you're talking in terms of education, when you're kind of talking through things with adopters and kind of doing their screening, like how busy are their days? Is it realistic that they can devote enough time to caring for their dog, walking them, feeding them, whatever, meeting whatever medical needs they have? Is that realistic? Dogs are expensive. I think we all know this, but they are expensive. Um, so there are resources to support them in terms of costs, but nonetheless, they're expensive. Dogs can be difficult to understand, like we talked about, their body language, emotional state, etc., are so crucial to accurately interpret, but that can be tricky. That's where kind of the education piece comes in. Here are some resources to better help you understand dogs' body language. Dogs have many needs. Again, I know I sound like a broken record. But we need to make sure that dogs are really, or that owners are really able to recognize and meet those needs. So, for example, I think everyone knows that dogs need water. Um, but if you have an older arthritic dog, it's important that they can also reach that water comfortably. So an 80-pound dog, it might be a lot for them to reach to the floor to get a water bowl. So can we do things like get a raised water bowl? To meet those individual needs. So it's important, like that. And they have water, but is it being changed frequently enough? Is the bowl being cleaned? So these things that we might take for granted. So this is the next point is one of the huge, huge, huge points that I try to hit home. And this is supported by lots of research. What we see pre-adoption, the behavior we see is not necessarily predictive post-adoption. So I know that organizations do all kinds of behavior assessments, risk assessments, etc. That's a whole separate sort of body of research. There are lots of issues with those. So we shouldn't necessarily disregard all the information we gather from those, but take everything with a massive grain of salt. So because of all the things that kind of we've discussed and what have you, what you see in a shelter is not necessarily what you're going to get at home. So that's why we kind of err on the side of caution. I hate things like this dog is bulletproof. That is not a thing. So it's possible that what they're trying to talk about is this dog is able to tolerate a lot. But there are also differences within dogs. So that's really important to remind owners or adopters. And also, what resources do adopters have in place in case of the unexpected? So, if they lose their job, if they have to move, what kind of financial resources are available? So things like food pantries, low-cost vet care. If they have to go on a work trip, or if they've had a change in job and now have to be gone for lots of hours during the day, are there caregivers? Are there pet sitters? Are there dog walkers? So seeing what resources that they have in place. Okay, last piece of the puzzle, providing post-adoption support to adopters. Okay, post-adoption support is so, so, so important. So what the science says about this. So multiple studies have found that post-adoption support significantly decreases the likelihood that a dog will be returned or relinquished. And those studies looked at post-adoption support in terms of veterinary care and dog training. So we don't know a lot about the specifics of the type beyond this of post-adoption support, but kind of what we can extrapolate from these studies and kind of what we know about relinquishment and whatnot shows overall how important post-adoption support is. Okay, so again, I fully appreciate that organizations have limited resources. They might not be able to follow up with all adopters, and the kind of scope of their ability to follow up might vary widely. So ideally, these are kind of the things that we would like to do. So how to prepare. So ideally, follow-up should happen multiple times through the first year post-adoption. Research has found that dogs are in increased risk for relinquishment up to the first year after they go home. So the relinquishment risk decreases over that course of the year, but it does stay increased. If possible, ask adopters before taking the dog home if they have a preferred method of contact, phone call versus email. You might see some generational differences. No, please don't call me, but can you text me? So talk to them about that. Research has found, and anecdotally, that even organizations who have the bandwidth to give really solid post-adoption support, it is one thing if you offer it, it is another if you can get a hold of the adopters, and that you can, be able to sort of talk to them along the way. If someone decides they're going to bring their dog back, they've made up their mind. That is their point of crisis. That is their breaking point. All the intervention in the world at that point probably is not going to cause them to be like, oh, actually, yes, I will keep my dog. So we've really got to forge a relationship between the moment the dog goes home, to kind of track things and see how they're doing along the way before it becomes a crisis, before they're like, I've got to get rid of this dog. So talking to them, say, hey, we're just going to check in. Of course, you guys are welcome to call us as well, but we want to check in and kind of like see how things are going, see if you have any questions, what's the best way to reach you. And then figure out what resources your shelter and community offer. So if you have a larger shelter that does training classes, if you have a network of other trainers in the area that you kind of refer people out to. And again, what community resources? So things like if someone does lose their job, if they feel like they need to give their dog up purely because they can't afford it, what is available in their community. The bottom logo is with an awesome organization that I collaborate with where I live here in Vermont. It's a mobile pet food shelf. So I borrowed their logo. Okay. Pointers to prepare for giving post-adoption support. Ask open-ended questions. I don't know if anyone's ever worked in retail. Many, many, many years ago when I did, that's how I was taught is, you want to ask people things that are not a yes or no question. So ask open-ended questions. Be empathetic and refrain from being judgmental. So use phrases such as, and I know these might sound corny, so bear with me, but adding a new dog to the family is a big change. So like acknowledge that this is a huge thing they're going through. I know it can be hard to get up early and take your dog out when it's cold. You guys live in a place that has very harsh winters, and I don't want to get out of bed and take out my dog when it's in the negative degrees. So I also get really frustrated too when my dog is doing things that I'd rather not he do. If they say something like, yeah, everything's fine. Yeah, we're okay. It's all great. Try to dig a bit deeper and see kind of so we can kind of get a picture of how things are going. So, one area of my own research has looked into how an adopter feels about their relationship with their dog. So, saying things like, how are you feeling about this? And if the person says, oh, yeah, I really like how my dog snuggles with me, or no, I wish my dog would spend more time closer to me, then that might be an indicator of how they feel things are going and what they're likely to do. And you can also kind of use this information, if you're able to follow up multiple times, to see shifts. Like initially, they're like, yeah, everything is great. Like we're really closely bonded. It's all great. And then 3 months later, they're like, I don't know, my dog's really annoying. Like I don't love spending time with him. Then you can see there's kind of a shift, and that's where intervening needs to happen. So, how are you adjusting with a change in your routine? I'm a very, very rigid person. I don't like changes. I know that everybody is not that way, but how are you doing with these changes? So if you have to get up earlier, if you have to go to bed later, how's it going? And what are some fun things that you've been doing together? So really focusing on kind of the whole sort of big picture of the relationship, not sort of focusing on anything negative. And at this point, if they're like, oh yeah, my 3-year-old has been walking my dog by herself, like, oh, okay, that sounds like fun. But also, let's find some ways that maybe we can just make sure that everyone's safer. So to kind of stop and say, oh, okay, rather than passing judgment, but like, let's try to stop and think how we can adjust the situation before something terrible happens. Remember, there is a possibility of a social desirability bias. I know this is probably a very technical term, but basically, in this field, because it's very emotional, and because, some big decisions can be made in terms of outcomes for dogs, people may want to say what they think you want to hear. So when they say things like everything's fine, everything might not be fine. So that's why it's really important to just be like, God, like, I know it's really hard to have a dog that's very reactive. Like, trust me, I get it. Like, here are some things that I do to keep myself sane so that I can then work with my dog. Okay, meet adopters where they are. So I don't mean literally. Figuratively. So focus on meeting adopters where they are and offering concrete and constructive solutions. So for example, here are a list of positive reinforcement-based trainers in your area. It seems like you want to work on some behavior stuff. Please don't find a bunch of misinformation on the internet. Here are people that we recommend. Um, a front clip harness might make walking your high energy dog a bit easier. I met a woman at a talk I gave locally a little while ago who had a very energetic, large dog, and she was a little bit older, and she's like, walking this dog is a nightmare. So I'm like, okay, well, can we change some things that maybe make it a little bit easier? Um, and here are some more ideas of appropriate and fun games your dog and your kids can play together. If those are the people who say, oh, my 3-year-old is walking my dog, say, oh, that's really sweet that your child wants to interact with your dog. Let's find some other safer things that they can do together. And let's talk about creating a realistic routine. If you know that you are not going to do X, Y, and Z, that you're not going to give your dog these long, enriching walks first thing in the morning, like, know that you're not going to. Like, it's not realistic. So what can we do that makes sense for your family? And just listen. I literally, this is the field that I work in, and I have a very behaviorally challenging dog. He's older now, so it's less so. But that experience of when things aren't going right, or things are overwhelming, can be just very isolating. And so people might just want to vent, and that's okay. So in conclusion, use pre-adoption screenings to understand what topics adopters particularly need educating on. If it doesn't seem like they need educating anything in particular, then kind of go back to that list where it's an overview of like, oh, these are things that we should touch on. If you are unable to offer post-adoption support, use the use the information you've gathered in screenings to determine who needs the resources most. So things like children in the home. They are families that really need the post-adoption support if you can't give it to everyone. So lastly, we can't completely get rid of risks, right? So we can't completely take away the risk that a dog will be returned, that there will be a safety risk, that the dog won't have the optimal quality of life. All we can do is mitigate those risks. So the kind of 3 things that I've gone over here, that's what they strive to do, right? Using the scientific evidence to say, this is how we can intervene, this is what we can really do to increase its likelihood that it will be successful for everybody. Um, this is really bad, and if one of my students did this in a presentation, I would go after them. But if you want any references, I'm happy to provide them for you to you. This is my organization and social media. And does anyone have any questions? And that is all from me.
I'll I'll ask a question. First of all, thank you for this very helpful information. I wonder how do you address the issue of the different ways that people view the role of the dog in their homes? Like I see that as sometimes an issue. Is the dog a family member? Is it, more of just something to have around? Is it providing some kind of security? And how do we get people to think differently about that?
Yeah, so I think that's a really good question. So I think that's information that we can gather kind of in those post-adoption screening, or those pre-adoption screening. So when we're talking to adopters, like, what do you foresee? How do you foresee this dog fitting in? Maybe it's an older family, an older couple, and they just kind of are home a lot and they just kind of want a dog to spend time with. Maybe it's quite busy, energetic people who really want a dog to go everywhere with them. So these are kind of what we're talking about, I guess, in terms of the problem with having these very specific narratives of how a dog should fit into their life. So I think reminding them of things like we have a lot in common with our dogs. We do, our emotions, our motivations, etc. But we are not the same species. We're asking a lot for our dogs to fit in with us. So we need to think about what's realistic and what's in their best interest. And that I think is kind of an over sort of kind of overall, but also thinking about what's appropriate for each individual dog. There are some dogs that will be happy to go out shopping with you and go to the beach and go to restaurants and sit in cafes while you're eating outside and whatnot. There are other dogs who absolutely that is inappropriate for. So that's where I think really understanding a dog's individual needs is really important in terms of what's right for them. I also think of narratives within the family. And I know I keep harping on about kids and dogs, but research has found that sometimes adults really want their child to have a very specific relationship with this dog, because maybe it's what they had when they were young, or it's what they see on TV, or what have you. But, not all children love dogs and want to interact that way. But also, not all dogs want that type of interaction. So, just kind of realizing that there are different things. And I think that also comes back to advocating for your dog. So, if my dog doesn't like people to approach him, and I remember many years ago, we were walking and there were young kids who wanted to like run up and say hi. And I was like, no, like, what can we kind of do instead of that? So, children learn best by telling them what to do, not what not to do. So I had them stand across the street and wave to him. So that was like Milo's Wavers Club. So it's a bunch of, I don't know, maybe like 4 or 5 year olds, and they would wave to him as we walked by. So they were safe, he was safe, everyone was having, a positive experience. So I guess, I don't know if I'm answering your question well, but I guess really thinking about what the household wants, where they see their dog fitting in. A dog is not a child. They are not a human. There's research that's found that like caregiving styles, like the caregiving style of the human that they were raised with, they often project onto their dog, and that's how they interact with their dog. So dogs are not humans. They have a whole separate range of needs, overlap, but still separate. So just kind of thinking through what this looks like. And, it's okay for organizations to say, hey, I appreciate that this is what you want, how you want this dog to fit into your household, but this isn't the right fit for you. Does that answer your question?
Yeah. Yeah, thanks.
I don't know if anyone else has any questions. If not, it's totally fine. I don't expect you to.
Karen, could you go back a slide to the QR code?
Yes. No, I can't. Okay, hold on one second. It didn't like that. Bear with me. Oh, sorry, it doesn't like backwards apparently. Okay. So yeah, that's the QR code for the dog rehoming project. Our website is being updated as we speak, and not by me. I've given up on that. So I've outsourced that. So it's being worked on. Resources do go up there, infographics, and other things like researcher interviews and all sorts of different useful things, as well as on our social media accounts. So yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Karen. Thank you guys, everyone who popped on. We'll be sure to send out a follow-up email with the recording in case you wanted to share it with anybody, as well as a post-presentation survey, and a lot of resources that Karen has been putting together. So, yeah,
Yeah.
thank
Oh, wait,
you.
I see. Sorry, hold on. I feel like there are things in the oh, sorry. Yes, I see you now. Sorry, I thought you. I was like, there are things in the chat, but I see you already addressed them. Okay. So thank you very much.
All right.
Thanks,
Bye,
Karen.
everyone.
All right. Bye. Take care.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.